My name is Elaine Carter. I am 6 to 4 years old, and I never thought the words that would sting the most in my entire life would come from my own daughter. On the happiest day of hers, she leaned in so close I could feel her veil brush my cheek. Perfume still fresh from the dressing room. The string lights over the vineyard patio glowed soft and golden. Photographers called out directions, guests rustled in their seats. It should have been a perfect movie moment. Instead, my daughter whispered, "Mom, please don't embarrass us today." Her mouth was smiling for the cameras. Her eyes were not. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe she'd said don't stress or don't worry, something else. Anything else, what? I asked quietly. Emma didn't look at me again. She kept her eyes on the aisle, on the rows of white chairs and the waiting arch of flowers. Just don't make a scene, okay? Dad's really nervous. Mark's family is here. I just need today to go smoothly. There it was, smoothly. In other words, stay small. Stay quiet. Don't be yourself. I swallowed past something sharp in my throat and nodded. Of course, I said. It's your day. She gave my hand a quick squeeze, already turning away as the coordinator waved for her to get into position. Her father, Richard, stood a few feet away in a tailored tux, tall and gray at the temples, the picture of respectable success. His new wife, Tiffany, a decade younger and 2 decades blonder than me, fluttered around him, straightening his boutonniere and smoothing his lapels like she owned the air he breathed. I stepped back, out of the way, out of the pictures, out of the story. It wouldn't have hurt so much if the words had come from anyone else. I've been looked down on most of my life. I know the weight of other people's judgment. Trailer girl in high school, the cleaning lady in the suburbs where I worked, the ex-wife when Richard upgraded to a brighter model. But hearing "don't embarrass us" from the same mouth that used to call me mommy, that used to fall asleep on my shoulder after nightmares, that used to say, "You're the only one who understands me," that was a different kind of pain. I stood there as the music swelled and my daughter, my only child, walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Not mine. Richard had insisted, of course. It's traditional, he'd said, as if that settled it, as if tradition had ever done me a single favor. Emma had agreed so quickly it took my breath away. You can still walk behind us, Mom, she'd said on the phone, like she was offering me a consolation prize. You know, a support, like I was a piece of furniture. So I watched from the second row, because that's where they put me. Not with the parents of the bride, not at the end of the aisle, but 1 row back, next to a potted olive tree and a white wooden sign that said choose a seat, not a side. Cute sentiment. The reality was less poetic. I supposed to understand how we got there. How? A girl who once climbed into my lap to whisper her secrets ended up asking me not to embarrass her in my own family. You'd have to know the years that came before the string lights and the silk dress. You'd have to know me back when I was 22. Wearing a borrowed white dress and standing in front of a church, thinking I was marrying the man who'd protect me from the world instead of the man who'd teach our daughter to be ashamed of me. I grew up in South Boston, in a 3rd-floor walk-up where the walls were thin and the winters were long. My father drank more than he worked, my mother held 3 jobs and 10 grudges, and I learned early that if you wanted something, you didn't wait for anyone to hand it to you. I met Richard at the diner, where I worked nights. He was a law student at Northeastern then, all big words and bigger dreams. With clean hands and a leather briefcase, he ordered black coffee and blueberry pie, stayed until closing, and left tips big enough to make the other girls glare at me. You're gonna marry out of this place, my coworker Denise said, rolling silverware and napkins. Just don't forget us when you're rich. I thought she was joking. I thought I was in love. Isn't that how all the worst decisions start? We married fast, like people do when they think love is enough to outrun everything else. For a while, it seemed like we were right. He passed the bar. We moved to a small rental house with more cabinets than I'd ever seen in a kitchen. I left the diner when Emma was born. I remember the first time he held her. He cried. I cried. The nurse cried. It felt like something holy. You and me, kid, I whispered to her tiny face. We're gonna make it better than what I had. I promise. For a few years we did okay. Money was tight, but we were young and stubborn. I picked up part-time cleaning jobs when Emma started preschool. Richard made partner at a small firm, then a bigger one. Nice suits replaced cheap ones. Weeknights at home turned into late nights at the office. Dinners were eaten in separate rooms more often than not. I was still in love. Or maybe I was in love with the idea of us. It's hard to tell the difference when you're in it. The first crack showed up as a lipstick smudge on his collar. It was the faintest thing. Coral pink. Not my color. Not my lipstick. He laughed it off. Klein hugged me, he said, rolling his eyes. You know how some people are. Boundaries, Elaine. I wanted to believe him. So I did. That's another way the worst decisions start. Then there were more late nights. More forgotten anniversaries. Credit card charges for restaurants I'd never heard of. Business trips that didn't match the cities on his airline miles. When I finally confronted him, he didn't deny it. Elaine, he said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table. Hands folded like we were negotiating a contract. We've grown apart. You know that, this thing with Tiff, it just happened. She understands my world. We want different things now. She's 29, I said. She wants bottle service and Instagram. What we want is to fix our marriage. He shook his head, looking more tired than guilty. You want to fix something that's already over? He moved out 2 weeks later. The papers arrived a month after that. Irreconcilable differences. Such a polite way of saying traded in for a newer model. I would have taken the hit, swallowed the humiliation, and rebuilt my life quietly if it weren't for Emma. She was 12 when he left, old enough to understand something was wrong, young enough to blame it on the person who stayed. He says you're always angry. She snapped at me one night, slamming her bedroom door so hard a picture frame fell. He says you make everything difficult. He says that, does he? I asked, picking up the frame with hands that were starting to shake. He says you wouldn't support his career. She went on, oblivious. That you were jealous. That you held him back. You're always yelling, Mom, you're always making drama. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Emma, I said, your father left because he wanted someone younger and easier. That's it. That's the whole story. That's not what he said, she shot back. Of course it's not, I replied. The truth doesn't make him look good. The thing about divorce is that the person willing to lie most convincingly often wins a child's ear. Richard had money, a new condo with a rooftop pool, vacations that looked nice on social media. I had a 2-bedroom apartment over a laundromat and a schedule of double shifts. In his world, I was a bitter ex who didn't move on. In mine, I was a woman who kept a roof over our heads and packed lunch boxes at 6 a.m. At first, Emma switched houses every other weekend, then it was every other week, then, sometime around 17, it was mostly his place, with occasional visits to mine, when she needed something practical help with a college essay. Laundry, a quiet place to study for finals. Don't get me wrong, Mom, she said once, flicking through her phone on my couch. I love you. But Dad's place is nicer, less intense. That's what she called my rules about curfew and homework and not drinking in strangers' basements. Sure, I said, his place is nicer. Somebody cleans it for him. You, she said. Without looking up, I didn't answer when she graduated high school. I clapped the loudest in the auditorium. I was the only one screaming her name. Richard and Tiffany smiled for pictures. I watched from a few steps back as Emma pulled them close for a photo and said, my parents. I was in the next shot and Mom, too, she added. As if I were an afterthought. You learn to live with being an afterthought. It's not easy, but it's possible. Years passed. Emma went to college. I helped with what I could, a few hundred here. A used car there. Richard paid the bulk of the tuition and never let her forget it. Your father's working so hard for you, Tiffany would say in photos and captions and Christmas cards. You're a lucky girl. Lucky. Then, a little over a year ago, Emma called me in the middle of a Tuesday. Mom, she said, breathless, Mark proposed. We're getting married. I sat down on the edge of my bed. My heart did a funny little flip. That's wonderful, I said. Congratulations, baby. Tell me everything. She did. She talked about the ring, the restaurant, the way Mark had gotten down on one knee and knocked over a wine glass because his hands were shaking. We're thinking a June wedding, she said. At a vineyard. Mark's parents know a place. It's going to be big. Big is good, I said softly. You deserve big. A part of me imagined us in my tiny kitchen, spreading bridal magazines across the table like we used to spread our projects at the old Formica table in the house before the divorce. I imagined dress shopping, cake tasting, arguments about centerpieces, laughter. The reality turned out different. I didn't even hear about the venue until it was already booked. We put down a deposit today, Emma texted. Dad and Mark's parents jumped on a cancellation at this amazing vineyard. I stared at the words Dad and Mark's parents for a long time. I scrolled up, looking for you anywhere in the planning. I didn't find it. I would have helped. I wrote back, then deleted it before sending. It sounded small, needy. Instead I sent, can't wait to see it, proud of you. There were group chats I wasn't part of, Pinterest boards I never saw. When Emma finally invited me to one dress fitting, it was phrased like a favor. Mark's mom has gone to most of them, she said. She's more into that stuff, but I want you to see the dress, too. Just don't say anything negative, okay? It's really expensive and Dad's paying. I didn't say anything negative. The dress was beautiful. Emma was beautiful. She twirled in front of the mirror and asked, do I look like a bride? You look like my little girl playing dress up, I said, and like a grown woman starting her life. Hold still. I'm trying not to cry. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Sometimes, for a few minutes, it almost felt like the version of us I dreamed of. Then there were moments like the rehearsal dinner. They put me at the far end of the table, away from the parents' section. Richard gave a toast about raising Emma that somehow erased my entire existence. He talked about late nights helping with homework and working extra hours for tuition. Like he'd done it alone. Tiffany dabbed at her eyes. Mark's parents smiled politely. Emma glanced at me once, then quickly away when she saw my face. Later that night, Mark walked me to my car. Elaine, he said. Are you okay? I forced a smile. I'm fine, it's been a long day. He hesitated, hands in his pockets. I hope you know. I see you. I mean, I know what you've done for Emma. I blinked. What do you mean? He shrugged, looking suddenly younger than his 30 years. She told me some stuff about when she was little, and my mom did some digging. She's thorough. I frowned. Digging? He shook his head quickly. It's nothing bad. I just want you to know I'm glad you're here. Even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes, that should have made me feel better instead. It made me wonder what exactly his mother had dug up. The morning of the wedding, I ironed my dress 3 times even though it didn't need it. I pinned my hair out the way Emma always said made me look classy. I stared at myself in the mirror and tried to see what she saw when she looked at me. And winced. I arrived at the vineyard early as instructed. The place was stunning. Rolling hills, rows of grapevines, a big white barn strung with lights. Staff in black shirts and earpieces hurried about like they were in a movie. Mother of the bride. A young woman with a clipboard asked. Yes, I said, a little too eagerly. She checked her list. Okay, Miss Carter, you're seated in the second row on the bride's side. After the ceremony, you'll head to table 12 at the reception. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, she gestured toward Richard and Tiffany, are up front and at the head table. Of course. Emma was in the bridal suite getting her hair done when I finally saw her. She looked radiant, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, veil pinned perfectly. Bridesmaids fluttered around her like birds. Mom, she said when I walked in, you made it. As invited, I said lightly, kissing her cheek, you look stunning. Don't make me cry, she said, fanning her eyes. They just finished my makeup. Richard came in then, adjusting his tie, Tiffany twirling a curling iron cord behind him. You look amazing, sweetheart, he said, kissing Emma on the forehead. Ready to make this official? She nodded, sudden tears shimmering again. I think so. The coordinator called out 10 minutes from the hallway. That was when Emma pulled me aside and told me not to embarrass them. I stood there, watching her walk away on her father's arm, feeling like I'd been pushed out of my own life. The ceremony was beautiful. I'll give them that. The vows were heartfelt, the readings tearjerkers, the whole thing very Instagrammable. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the guests cheered. Mark dipped Emma for the kiss. The photographers ate it up. I clapped, I smiled. I did not embarrass anyone. During the photos, a planner steered me to the side. We're doing family formals now, she said. Bride and groom with parents. I stepped forward instinctively. That's me. She looked at her list. I have Richard and Tiffany Carter listed here as a bride's parents. I stared at her. I'm her mother. Elaine Carter. Oh. She flushed. I'm so sorry, they only wrote down. Let me check with them. She hurried over to where Emma and Mark were posing with Richard and Tiffany under the arch. I watched her speak to them. Watched Richard glance at me. Watched Tiffany's mouth tighten. Emma's eyes flicked from the planner to me, then back again. After a moment, the planner came back. We're running a little behind, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. We'll grab some shots with extended family at the reception, okay? Extended family. I stepped back so far my heels sank into the grass. As guests moved toward the barn for cocktail hour, I found myself drifting toward the edge of the property. There was a row of old oak trees not far from the parking lot, quiet and shaded. I stood there, watching people laugh and clink glasses. My hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee someone had thrust at me. This is what it means not to embarrass them, I thought. It means disappearing. I might have stayed under that tree all night if Mark's mother hadn't found me. Elaine? She called, walking toward me in sensible heels that still somehow didn't sink into the dirt. Lisa Morgan was a tall woman with kind eyes and the sort of posture that said she'd spent years telling people what to do in a hospital or a courtroom. She hugged me like we'd known each other for years instead of months. There you are, she said. We've been looking for you. I didn't want to be in the way, I said. My voice sounded small even to myself. She stepped back and looked at me carefully. Did something happen? She asked. I opened my mouth to say no. What came out instead was, my own daughter asked me not to embarrass her today. Lisa's expression shifted from concern to something like anger. She said that? She asked. In the bridal suite, I said. Right before she walked down the aisle. To be fair, I think she was parroting some of Richard's anxieties. Lisa exhaled through her nose. Richard, she said, like the name tasted bad. That man. She trailed off, studying my face. Elaine, she said slowly, there's something you should know. And I think tonight, everyone else should know it too. I frowned. What are you talking about? She glanced toward the barn, where staff were lighting candles on the tables. I'll let Mark tell it. She said. But just don't leave, okay? Not yet. 3 hours. Give us 3 hours, Lisa. I don't want to cause trouble. I began. She squeezed my arm. You won't, she said. You'll be the one thing that finally makes sense. She led me back toward the barn before I could argue. Inside, the reception was in full swing. The room was strung with Edison bulbs, the tables covered in white linen and eucalyptus runners. A DJ announced the bridal party like it was a football game. Emma and Mark burst into cheers, doing a little goofy dance on their way to the head table. I found my place card at table 12, just like the planner had said. It was in the back corner, near the restrooms. I could see the head table if I leaned around a pillar. At least the other guests at my table were friendly, a couple of Mark's cousins, a co-worker of Emma's, and an older man from the church who told the same joke 3 times. We made small talk about the food, the weather. The DJ's questionable song choices stopped. My eyes kept straying to the front of the room. Richard held court at the head table, laughing loudly, refilling people's glasses like he owned the wine in the barrels outside. Tiffany leaned into every camera angle, twisting to make sure her good side was captured. Emma glowed about an hour into dinner. The DJ tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, if I could have your attention, we're going to move into speeches now. First up, the father of the bride, Richard Carter. Applause scattered around the room. Richard stood, straightened his jacket, and took the mic with the ease of a man who'd spoken in many boardrooms. Thank you. Thank you. He said, I'll try not to talk as long as I bill by the hour. Polite laughter. I just want to say, he went on, looking at Emma with misty eyes, how proud I am of my little girl today. Watching you walk down that aisle. I thought back to all the nights I stayed up helping you study, all the hours I spent working to pay for your education, for this wedding, for the life you deserve. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I remember taking on extra cases to make sure you could go to that private high school, he said, writing those tuition checks, paying the first deposit for this gorgeous venue when there was a waiting list a mile long. I set my fork down. He was rewriting history in real time, and no one but me seemed to notice. Well, almost no one. I heard a voice say quietly near my shoulder. I turned. Lisa had slipped into the empty chair beside me. Just breathe, she murmured. Let him talk. His time is almost up, Lisa. What is going on? I whispered. She didn't answer. Her eyes were on her son. When Richard wrapped up his speech with a sentimental quote he probably pulled from the internet, the room applauded. Emma wiped a tear. Mark hugged him, whispered something in his ear, and took the microphone. Thank you, Richard. He said. That was very generous. There was something in his tone I couldn't quite place. I know we're supposed to go to the maid of honor next, Mark said. But if you'll all forgive me, I'd like to say something first. Something I've been waiting to say all night. The DJ looked confused, but he rolled with it. Sure thing, man. It's your wedding. The room quieted. Mark took a deep breath. When I asked Emma to marry me, he began. I knew I was getting an incredible wife. Smart, kind, stubborn as hell. Sorry, Pastor James. But also, incredibly loyal. She loves hard. And that's partly because of who she is. But it's also because of how she was raised. He paused. Now, tonight. You've heard a lot about one side of that story, he said. You heard about late nights and deposits and sacrifices. And I don't want to take anything away from that. Richard is right. He worked hard. He paid for a lot. That matters. Richard nodded, sipping his wine like he was accepting an award. But there's someone else in this room, Mark went on, whose sacrifices you haven't heard about. Someone whose name wasn't on the planning emails, who wasn't on the vendor contracts, and whose seat is further from the head table than it should be. My heart started beating so hard I could hear it in my ears before Emma and I got engaged. Mark said. I asked her to tell me about her childhood, not just the Instagram version, the real one. And then my mom, he nodded toward Lisa, did what she does best. She checked facts. She looked at records. She called people who remembered. Lisa's jaw was set. Eyes fixed ahead. We found out, Mark said, that when Emma was little and Richard left, there was a savings account that had been opened in her name. An account that held every extra dollar her mother managed to scrape together from cleaning houses, working nights, selling things she loved. It was supposed to be for Emma's future, for school, for a life beyond a 2-bedroom over a laundromat. Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard's face went a shade paler. We found out, Mark continued, that not long after the divorce, that account was emptied. He looked directly at Richard, Not by Elaine. Silence fell like a blanket. We also found out, Mark said, voice steady, that the first deposit for this venue? The one you just took credit for? That came from a cashier's check in Elaine's name. Money she'd been saving quietly for years. She didn't tell Emma because she didn't want to make her choose sides. She didn't tell anyone. I felt the room tilt. I hadn't told anyone because I was ashamed the amount was so small. A few $1,000s scraped together over years of saying no to myself. It barely made a dent in the total cost of this wedding. I never imagined someone would notice where it had gone. Lisa took something from her purse and held it up, a piece of paper in a plastic sleeve. Bank statements, Mark said. Public records, once you know where to look. Elaine Carter paid the first deposit on this venue. Richard reimbursed himself from an account he'd borrowed from before. The pastor shifted in his seat. Guests whispered. Tiffany stared at the paper like she could burn it with her eyes. Emma, Mark said. Turning to his bride, when we talked about this, you cried for 2 hours. Not because of the money, but because of the story you've been told your whole life. About who sacrificed what. About who was difficult and who was supportive. Emma's face had gone completely blank. The way it used to when she was a teenager trying not to show she was hurt. You asked me not to bring it up tonight? Mark went on softly. You said you didn't want drama. I get that. But I also told you I am not starting our marriage on a lie. Not by omission. Not by polite silence. He looked out at the room. So tonight, he said, before we go any further, there is someone here who deserves to be honored properly. Someone who packed lunches and worked double shifts and went to parent-teacher conferences alone. Someone who gave up a house and a husband and her pride instead of giving up her child. Someone who paid for more than any of you will ever know. Because she paid with time and health and years. He put the microphone down on the table for a moment. His voice thick. Elaine, he said, his eyes finding mine across the room. Mom, would you please stand? For a second, I couldn't move. Every eye in that barn turned toward table 12. Toward me, the woman in the off-rack dress, sitting near the restrooms. The one who'd been asked not to embarrass anyone. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I pushed my chair back and rose. The room blurred at the edges. All I could see clearly was my daughter's face, pale, wet, trembling, and Mark's. Calm and steady beside her. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark said, picking up the mic again. This is the woman who made this day possible long before any of us knew it. This is the woman who loved Emma when it was easy and when it was really, truly hard. If anyone deserves a standing ovation tonight, it's her. It started with Lisa. She stood, clapping hard. Then Mark's father rose beside her. Then the bridesmaids. The groomsmen, my table. People I didn't know. Neighbors from our old street. Co-workers of Emma's who had only ever heard one version of our lives. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. The sound of their applause hit me like a wave. I stood there, rooted to the spot, tears streaming down my face in a way I couldn't have stopped if I tried. I heard chairs scraping, someone whistling, someone shouting, "You go, Mama." From the back, even the bartender was clapping. The only two people who didn't stand were Richard and Tiffany. Richard sat stiff as a board, hands flat on the table, jaw clenched. Tiffany whispered something in his ear. He shrugged her off without looking at her. Emma stared at me, hands pressed to her mouth. Eventually, the applause died down enough for Mark to speak again. Mom, he said, I know this is the last thing you wanted attention. But it's long overdue. I'm sorry for the years you were talked about instead of listened to. I'm sorry for the weekends you spent alone while Emma believed a version of history where you were the villain. I'm sorry we took so long to get here. He put the microphone down again, and, to my shock, left the head table. He walked all the way through the bar into my corner, weaving between chairs and centerpieces. By the time he reached me, my face was a mess. Mark, I whispered. What are you doing? He smiled, that shy, earnest smile that had made me like him from the start. Fixing something, he said. He pulled me into a hug right there in front of everyone. He was tall enough that I had to stand on my toes. The whole room blurred in a mess of lights and color and sound. When he let go, Emma was behind him. She moved slowly, like each step weighed more than the last. When she reached me, she didn't say anything. She just wrapped both arms around my neck and sobbed. I'm sorry, she choked. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Hush, I said into her hair, stroking the back of her dress carefully so I wouldn't disturb the tiny buttons. You know now. That's what matters. No, she said, pulling back to look at me. Mascara streaks stained her cheeks. What matters is that I heard you. I let him. She glanced toward her father. Tell me who you were. I believed him. I asked you not to embarrass me like you were some stray we picked up, not the woman who kept me alive. Her voice broke. There's more. She whispered. Mark and I. Mom, we went through those records weeks ago. We confronted Dad. He said it was complicated and none of my business. I was so scared of ruining the wedding that I let it go. I made you sit in the back and let him take another bow. She shook her head, disgusted with herself. I should have been the one to stand up for you, she said. I should have told the truth. You did, I said quietly. You told Mark. You told the one person who needed to hear it most after everything you've done. I still asked you to be small, she said. I'm so ashamed. I cupped her face in my hands, the way I had when she was little, and scraped her knees. Emma, I said, if there is one thing I don't want you to carry into your marriage, it's shame. Especially not over loving the wrong version of your father for a while. You were a child. He should have known better. She sniffed, nodding. Richard appeared then, looking like a man walking toward a firing squad. Emma, he started. We shouldn't be doing this here. This is… She turned on him with a fury I hadn't seen since she was 16. Don't you dare, she said. Don't you dare talk about what should or shouldn't happen here. You made this mess in our living room 20 years ago. You made this mess in bank lobbies and law offices in my head. If my husband wants to clean it up at our wedding, that's on you, not him. There was a murmur nearby as guests pretended not to listen and failed. Sweetheart, Richard said, lowering his voice. We can explain everything later. Your mother is very emotional, and stop calling her emotional like that's an insult. Emma snapped. She's emotional because she's been carrying my whole life on her back while you cash in, and told everyone you were the hero. He flinched. This isn't fair, he said. You don't understand how hard I worked. You have no idea what your mother was like back then. She was… I felt Lisa move to stand slightly behind my shoulder. Mark too. I realized then that I wasn't alone in this conversation anymore. Not the way I had been during the divorce. If you say difficult. I'm walking out, Emma said. And you can explain that to your friends at the firm. He closed his mouth. This is a wedding. Tiffany hissed, finally finding her voice. You're ruining it with all this drama. Emma looked at her, a slow, assessing look I recognized as my own reflected back at me. The only thing ruining my wedding, she said, is the lies that were baked into it. I'm not going to build a marriage on top of that rot. If the truth makes our guests uncomfortable, they can leave. Mom's not going anywhere. She turned back to me. Will you sit with us? She asked, voice small again. At the head table, where you should have been from the start. I hesitated, glancing at Lisa. She gave the tiniest nod. Go, she mouthed, for tonight. I said slowly, I'll sit where my daughter wants me. Tomorrow we can talk about all the years I didn't. Emma smiled through her tears. I like that. She whispered. They moved my place card from table 12 to the head table. Someone slid my chair between Emma and Mark. Richard and Tiffany stayed on the other side of the long table. A careful social gulf stretched between us like an invisible river. The rest of the evening wasn't perfect. How could it be after that? But it was honest. When the maid of honor gave her toast, she included a story about Emma and me baking crooked birthday cakes in her little apartment. When Mark's father spoke, he thanked me by name for raising the woman my son was smart enough to marry. When it was time for the mother-son dance, Mark and Lisa swayed to What a Wonderful World. Then the DJ announced a surprise, a mother-daughter dance. I didn't pick this, Emma whispered as the opening notes of You'll Be in My Heart floated through the barn. Mark did. He has good taste, I replied. We danced. I stepped on her dress twice. She didn't care. She cried. I cried. The guests clapped along. Richard watched from his chair, face unreadable. At one point, as the night wore on and people loosened their ties and kicked off their shoes, Lisa leaned in and said, we found more than just the bank records, you know. We found emails. Old ones, letters. He told people Elaine was unstable, that she blew through money, that she refused to contribute. She shook her head. If I've learned one thing in my career, she said, it's that the person who insists on controlling the narrative usually has the most to hide. I should have fought harder back then, I said quietly. Hired a better lawyer. Collected my own records. Maybe, she said. But you were busy raising a child. He was busy protecting his ego. That's on him, not you. Later, when the cake had been cut and the bouquet thrown, Emma and I stood outside under the oak tree where I'd hidden earlier. The night air was cooler, the stars bright above the vineyard. I wish it hadn't happened like that, she said. I wish we had figured this out years ago, before the wedding, before Mark had to say anything. I wish a lot of things, I said. I wish your father had stayed. I wish I'd been wiser. I wish you'd never had to be in the middle. But we got here. That counts for something. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Do you forgive me? She asked. For what? I replied. For being a child in a situation you didn't create? For believing the parent who told the prettier story? For needing to grow up before you could see past the shine? She sniffed. When you say it like that. Yes, I said. I forgive you. I forgave you years ago. Honestly. I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself and Dad. She asked. That's between you and him, I said. Forgiveness doesn't always mean access or trust. You can decide how much of your life he gets to see from here on out. She was quiet for a long moment. What about you? She asked. How much of your life does he get to see? I thought about it. Enough to know I turned out okay without him, I said. Not enough to let him rewrite any more of my story. She laughed softly. You're stronger than me, she said. No, I said. I just had a head start. We stood there a while longer, listening to the muffled thump of the DJ's music through the barn walls. Fireflies blinked in the grass. Somewhere, someone popped another bottle of champagne. Mom? Emma said. Double quotes. Yes, baby? I'm sorry I asked you not to embarrass me, she said. You're the only one tonight who didn't. I smiled into the dark. Good, I said. Because I'm done being anyone's embarrassment. When I went home that night, my dress smelled like wine and smoke and Emma's perfume. I took off my shoes at the door, the way my mother taught me, and sat at the kitchen table in the little house I bought myself after years of renting. I made a cup of tea, even though it was nearly 2 a.m. Old habits. I thought about the girl I'd been at 22 in the borrowed dress, believing a husband would be the roof over my head. I thought about the woman I was now with her own mortgage, her own car, her own set of keys, for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. I felt like the author. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been asked to make yourself small for someone else's big day, remember this. Sometimes the people who are most afraid you'll embarrass them are the people most terrified that the truth might come out. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't staying silent to keep the peace, but standing up or letting others stand you up so the lies have nowhere left to sit. And sometimes, if you keep showing up for your children even when they don't show up for you, there comes a day, maybe at a wedding, maybe in a quiet kitchen, maybe in a phone call out of the blue when the story finally gets told right, when the hall stands up for you, when your own child looks at you and sees not the version they were handed, but the woman who was there all along.